Welcome to The Cutting Floor, a weekly podcast of West Cannon Baptist Church. Hi, I'm Emily, and with me is Pastor Wes. This week, your sermon covered Genesis 19. If Lot's sons-in-law were part of Sodom because they wouldn't leave the city, why did the angels want to save them?
I thought that was a great question. Even really interestingly enough, people were asking after how many kids did Lot have, because he had his two daughters in the house, and then their sons-in-laws, and there's daughters. And so it's interesting that these were probably two other daughters of his and their husbands. And so while they probably weren't righteous because they were more than likely from the city, because of Abraham's prayer that he prayed to save Lot, and then the angels showing even more of the mercy of God, the ability to be saved was extended to Lot's family purely because of the mercy of God and Abraham praying specifically for Lot, which I thought was a really beautiful even showing of the gospel, that because of the intercessing of Jesus Christ, we are able to be saved by the mercy of God, even though we weren't worthy. And so while it just seemed like a little detail in the story of him going out, I think it was a really an extra showing of God's mercy, that even some of those men who weren't righteous were able to be saved. But sadly, we see them unwilling to go with Lot because they believed that God's destruction wouldn't come. So that while they were given the opportunity to leave the city, sadly, their folly kept them there.
Some individuals hold the opinion that Lot was just trying to be a light in a dark place. How can we reconcile our duty to share Christ with our duty to raise our family wisely?
Yeah, this was actually something I wish I had more time to cover in the sermon, but because of getting 38 verses, it's hard to cover everything that you want to do in one sitting. And what I see is kind of the crux with Lot, where everything kind of fell apart, was while Lot was righteous in the city, and other places in the scripture, like in 2 Peter 2, which is the scripture reading, it says that Lot's righteous soul was tormented by the sins of the people that he lived with. And so it does seem that he was bothered by what happened, but sadly we see Lot not really making much headway in any converts, given the fact that there weren't even 10 righteous people. And so where Lot fell apart probably was that he wasn't, while he was living as an example, he was not multiplying. And clearly even seen in his children, women who would marry men of the city, sons who were a part of the city, and then his two daughters who sadly later in the story come up with the plan to get pregnant by their father. Clearly he did not raise his family or protect his family from the influence of the world. And so where Lot failed wasn't that he was, being a light in a dark place. That was a good thing. He wasn't protecting his children from also seeing that, and then wasn't actually making disciples or multiplying or having other people come to know the God that he served. And so I think the reconciling that the two duties that are there is making sure that we are the ones as adults who have small children are asking our children to go be missionaries, right? They're not capable because most of our kids aren't saved, and so they can't go share with something that they don't know. But while we live in the world, we have to remember that we're in it but not of it. So while we're here in this world, we are here to be salt and light, to make a difference in the communities that we are, showing the people around us the grace of God and sharing the gospel with our words and with our actions, that we're taking the brunt of doing that, but not allowing the morality in our home to slip because of the influences that are there. Recognizing our primary duty as parents is to raise up our children. We need to make sure we're doing that and holding that line in balance. If we're having families over and maybe sharing the gospel with people, and we begin to see our children take on some of those worldly practices, that we don't blame the people we're sharing the gospel with, because the sin in our children's heart is what was desiring of maybe seeing some wrong actions in other kids. It's not the other kid's fault or the parents' fault. It's the sin in our children's heart that saw that and thought, hey, I want to try that. And so that just maybe needs to make us redouble our efforts in discipling our children. And so we need to focus there while we disciple our children, not sheltering them from everything that's bad, but also making sure that we're very particular about what we allow them to see, what we allow them to take in. And then when we notice, or if we notice that there are some tendencies of theirs that are slipping away from what we would desire, what God would have for us in his word, that we don't cut off those relationships. We just be maybe more intentional about having kids not around particular places. And I think with young children, just being careful of, Lot moving into the city and then being a part of the city, being a part of the nightlife of the city, he was setting a bad example as parents, or as a parent of not, he was there, but he wasn't making any headway into the culture. So while it's good for our kids to see us around people who don't believe, we need to make sure that they also see us sharing the gospel and hopefully seeing some progress that's there, not us becoming more like the worldly influences that are there, because they're going to watch us and see what we do. And so this is a deeply difficult concept, especially living in the world that we live in. Our world is very similar to Sodom. And so we have to be very careful to walk a fine line here, to not reject or abdicate our duty to share the gospel with the nations. But we also have to be very careful with our small children, and even in the teenage years as they begin to see and have some freedom in and of themselves. So it's not impossible, but it is very challenging. But I think that we, especially having children, we need to make sure that we're protecting them from some of those influences so that we don't end up like Lot with kids who have little to no moral compass. So it's a great question, and one that there is no clear answer in. There just needs to be a lot of time spent praying for those relationships, praying for our children. The Bible needs to be read around the table so our kids are hearing the word of God there at home. And then maybe even taking advantage of some of these evangelistic relationships to invite people over for dinner and have them a part of those Bible reading, have them a part of family prayer. If there's, I know of one family with younger kids, if they invited people over, they would invite the people over into their bedtime routine with the small kids. So they would go and read a Bible story with them before they went to bed and say, hey, this is just what we do. It'd be fun if you could see it. I think your kids would like that. And just so, sharing our lives with them to see it's not anything, we're not crazy people. Most of us aren't crazy people, but that we're just trying to live our lives and raise our kids the best that we can. So maybe inviting those people into our world and into those relationships can be a way that we have our kids see us sharing the gospel, and those who that we're sharing the gospel with seeing kind of how we do things at our home. So again, it's a fine line, and there's no perfect answer. It takes a lot of prayer, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of time and effort.
Were Lot's sons-in-laws part of the mob that came to Lot's house to commit the immoral acts?
It would seem so based on what Moses recorded, looking at verse 4 of Genesis 19. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man. I think given that description from Moses, it's pretty fair to assume that his sons-in-laws, and maybe even potentially if he did have sons, would have been a part of that crowd. Which is just a sad statement on where Lot's family was at that point, that they would even see their own father or father-in-law and say, we would do to you even worse than what we're about to do to the angels. And so we can just see really how morally depraved the society was, and how sadly that even got into Lot's family.
In verse 16, it says that Lot hesitated before leaving. Did he not want to leave and be saved?
Well, what I love about this particular concept is just seeing that, Lot's hesitation is such a beautiful opportunity to see the gospel, because he's being rescued from this and he's being pulled away, he hesitates. And I don't think he hesitated because he didn't want to be saved. I think he very much desired to preserve his life. I think what held him back was the thought that, given if, like some commentator said, he had 4 other kids in the city, he has 1/3 of his kids with him, and he knows the 2/3 are about to die. And I can imagine as a father that if I knew 2 out of my 3 kids were going to stay in a city, and I knew, I know what's coming and I know what's about to happen, I'm going to hesitate and think about running back to get them too. And I think we can kind of say this was bad Lot for hesitating, but I think there's something to say there that's not all bad, that he, knowing his kids and loving his kids and some of the in-laws there, hesitates thinking, could I have said one more thing to persuade them? Could I have done one more thing? But what I see is really the main point, because we see it in the text, because right after that's repeated, and because the Lord was merciful to him, that Lot lingered as an opportunity or as a moment for the Lord to show his mercy even more beautifully to us as the reader and to Lot, that Lot, even though you hesitated, I'm still pulling you out. Even though you were afraid, even though in this moment you may have doubted, I'm still going to be the force that carries you out. I'm going to be the one who gets you out of here, which I just think is just a beautiful sign of God's mercy, and such an encouraging sign to us as those who tend to linger in obedience as well. We can see what the right thing is to do, but because of our passions that are at war within us, we might think we want to do another thing and linger and hesitate. But we can see from the story of this that we went through in the story of Lot that we have a merciful God who can even help those who linger, like me and like you.
Does the fact that Lot prepared the food for the visitors alone show that his family was following the ways of Sodom and Gomorrah?
I think maybe not that they were exclusively following the ways of Sodom and Gomorrah, but definitely showing the fact that Lot's house wasn't in order. And we can see from the rest of the story that we know his family is following the ways of Sodom and Gomorrah. So maybe it's not that he prepared the food alone as the only reason, but maybe one star in a constellation of reasons that we see that his family was following the ways of Sodom and Gomorrah, given that his daughters, obviously, with their perverse actions later, his sons and sons-in-laws being a part of the city, his wife looking back and becoming a pillar of salt. Clearly, his family loved Sodom, and they were a part of that city. But I think here, seeing that Lot alone is preparing the hospitality, I think is definitely one part of showing that his family was not following the Lord. And again, that kind of goes back to one of the questions earlier about reconciling that duty to share Christ and our duty to raise our families wisely. We just again see Lot valued one over the other. He chose to value his hospitality to them more than to raise his family. He chose the fitting into the city more than raising here. And so that's the danger of trying to err on one side of that too much, as we tend to neglect the other. So this, I think, the fact that Lot alone, especially in comparison to Abram, who has his whole family a part of sharing the feast, I think that we can definitely see his house was not in order.
If you have any questions from the sermon or the sermon passage that you would like to have answered on the podcast, please email them by 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning to questions@westcannon.org. We'll see you next week.